Looking Forward Our Way podcast addresses today's critical issues affecting adults in Ohio. We focus on issues that affect our money and our neighborhoods. Our expert guests are here to provide the information and resources needed to address those challenges. We are looking forward our way. Hi, this is Brett. Carol and I have had many conversations on the changes which occur in our lives as we age and are reaching for retirement. Today's guest is going to lead us through the issues and challenges we face as we prepare for that next adventure. Let's welcome our expert guest, Eric Pennington, managing partner at Spirit of EQ. Their goal is to assist organizations and individuals grow their emotional intelligence. Eric leads the organization's strategy for keeping the mission moving and growing. Eric is also the author of the Well-Being Guide, Making the Most of Life and Work, which a practical guide offering readers the opportunity to evaluate their own lives through self-discovery. And he is the co-host of the Spirit of EQ podcast. Eric, thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you.
Eric, it's wonderful to see you again. I'm so glad you're joining us today. This topic is really of interest to me because I have worked with so many older adults and others who are wondering what's next. They want to retire, but they're really concerned about making sure they can keep busy. And what does that mean? It's a difficult situation for them. Many don't retire until they can answer that question. But before we actually delve into the topic, tell our audience more about you and your organization.
Sure. Well, Brett did a wonderful job in his intro, but Spirit of EQ really is an emotional intelligence data and people development company. And I say it that way because we use data in a big way to actually assess where are people at with their EQ. And then we help them build a practice around emotional intelligence, or again, as I call it, EQ. Because what we have found is that the concepts and the subject matter is of great interest these days. However, like many things, the execution or implementation of the subject is far more difficult. So we try to put a strong emphasis on building something that happens over time, because most of the people who come to it, whether they're a group, organization, or an individual, whatever it may be, they have a somewhat limited scope about what this is all about. And not to mention the pressure that AI puts on the whole deal. And I don't think you guys probably can get through an episode without somebody mentioning AI. But the reality of that, and I'm in the emotions business, so my perspective is, AI puts a great deal of pressure on folks to seek instantaneous answers, right? And that's really great when you're trying to determine whether or not a certain equation is the best one for that particular business model. It's not so great when it comes to human beings and their development. So our approach is, as I mentioned, data and people development leading to a practice of EQ.
So why do you think we fear retirement? I mean, is it the notion of growing old? Or are we fearful of no longer actually being needed in our job? And even, let's talk about needed in our community.
I think fear is probably one of the most prevalent, and it's not helped any, Brett, Carol, by our media that typically pounds that same kind of approach, right? A la, do you have enough for retirement? Will you run out of money before you die? I mean, all of these different scenarios that really are activators of fear. Now, again, I'm in the emotions business. So for me, fear is a wonderful emotion. But like many things, if left not managed, harnessed, it can turn into a huge driver in decision making, right? And the reality is that retirement is a concept that I think we probably should re-examine and what it means. And that maybe this fear that we have about it is not really founded. Because if you think about it, what should I fear about retirement? Yeah, if I've been spending my money and not saving a dime and I'm now 62 years old and I've never done any of that, Well, I think that's probably appropriate that you'd have a bit of fear about, am I going to have enough money? However, if we're kind of doing what we need to be doing, being prudent, being wise throughout our years, the idea about being concerned or afraid that something foreboding is going to happen is probably misplaced. And it kind of connects back to the work that we do, is to help people understand how to manage this process that happens in our brain every day. So whether we're talking about retirement or about where we're going to go on vacation or what school are we going to attend, whatever it may be, there's a process that your brain takes to come to that decision, good or bad.
Yeah, I think your point. You make a really good point about the fear mongering of will you have enough? Will you be able to do that? If that was taken out of the equation, if we did not hear that from marketing, would
Hmm.
we be afraid of this? Yes, we'd question about how much is enough. We would, of course, but it
Right.
would be based on our community and our friends and our family versus what the experts expect that we should
Well,
have.
Brett, when you think about it, I've heard this term used, that our brain has not evolved very well over hundreds, thousands of years, right? It's almost like we're still operating as if we're a clan in the Northern Europe, going to fight the next tribe type thing, right? And this is one where I think some of that is actually probably pretty appropriate, because there is this thing in us, in our brain, the fear of the being cast out of the tribe, right? The fear of not having enough, all of those different things, right? And not to mention the fact that all of us created some level of core beliefs when we were very, very young. And the vast majority of us never probably stopped when we were 21, 25, 28, keep going, right? To question those core beliefs. So those things become the blueprint for how our brain works. And I say it that way because if you're thinking in terms, you're getting messages that says, will I have enough? That goes to the core of us as human beings. Nobody wants to be without, whether it be food, shelter, clothing, money, whatever it may be. But here's the real good news for your audience: our brains can be rewired. We can think differently about things like retirement, having enough, and all the rest. It takes work, but we can rewire our brains. And I know that may sound somewhat revolutionary to those out there, but the reality is science proves that we can. It's just a matter, again, how much commitment are you willing to make to that work?
Eric, do you think that the issues of not enough, which truly transcend not just money, but health,
Mhm.
family, friends, community, activities, um, a lot of that is driven even in those other areas by social media marketing, public relations. If you look at any of the commercials, they range from, are you going to have enough money, to, well, you've got this disease, so here's the medication that you need to fix it. And all of the folks are, on the golf course, or or riding their bicycles, or whatever. But
Right.
it's like all of the messages we're receiving, it's not just that we don't have enough, but we ourselves are not enough. That we haven't really put ourselves on a path to be to have a successful life path, not just to retirement, but a complete life path. But it isn't that where marketing really is right now? You need this. You're not good enough. You need this.
It's, if I didn't know any better, I'd say it's a conspiracy,
Exactly. We
a
sort
real
of
one.
agree.
I should qualify
Yes.
that. A
Yes.
Yeah,
real conspiracy,
Yeah.
right.
because Carol, what you just described is probably on the whiteboard of many marketers who are making commercials, doing, social media, or whatever it may be, because it's a powerful sway.
Hmm.
Because if you can convince me that I should be afraid that I will not have enough money, I'll probably, how do I fix that? What do I need to do? Right. And that's probably marketing 101. This idea that you are doing without. And since you're doing without, you have to address that. And
Mhm.
that creates a bit of anxiety, urgency, whatever may come to you. Each person is different, but I think, yeah, you're on mark. And I think there's also something else too, and we find this in our work, is people, at least in our current day, have not spent a lot of time exploring what their emotions mean and what
Mhm.
they're maybe trying to tell us, right? We've done a really bad job at classifying what emotions are. We've done a really bad job at understanding what they mean. And I'm not saying that to, to lecture your audience to say, you should have, why didn't you? I'm saying it to say the opportunity, that's one you'd want to figure out.
Mhm.
Because when you start to understand what fear is and what it might be messaging you, you might find out that it is not trying to get you to do something desperate and to do something outrageous or unwise. It might be just trying to get your attention to, why don't you go visit that financial planner?
Mhm.
Why don't you think about what you might want to do once this particular career path comes to a close? But if you don't spend time paying attention, well, it'll do what it will do. I mean,
Mhm.
and again, when you have messages that are continually telling you that you're not enough, you don't have enough, what if, um, that's really hard for the average person to resist.
My next question came from the fact that I was wrestling with where did this start? I can remember as a child when an older adult came of age,
Hmm.
suddenly they were old and everybody was fearful of going to a nursing home because, of course, that was the kiss of death. Where did our society stop not just respecting and approving of age, but literally shying away, trying to stay away from aging? We baby boomers are really famous for trying to prove that we're still young. So where did that happen?
Yeah, I can't really tell you, Carol, precisely, but I think it has something to do with these cultural norms that we have been fed. For example, well, you're 65, so you should probably just take it easy, move out of the way, let the
Mhm.
younger generation, right?
Right.
Um, there are those that believe that message, and they may not really want to do that, but they may be convinced in their mind that that is true. And if the cultural norms fed by marketing, right, that says, well, my gosh, you are 68, you are whatever the number is, you should be thinking about taking it easy. You should think about, where do you want to live and vacation and play golf, whatever it may be. Take it easy. Those are things that are, for lack of a better way of saying it, those are man-made concepts that don't necessarily line up with reality. And don't
Mhm.
get me wrong, I do believe, yes, I know there are people who are 68 years old and they are in debilitating health and they can't do any type of work. They are going to have a sedentary life for whatever reason, right? Again, from a health perspective. But I don't believe that describes the vast majority. And I'm of the mind that our perspectives and how we think, and again, how we manage those emotions so that we can make a good choice, right?
Mhm.
So that we can go, you know what? I understand culture, society kind of worships at the altar of youth and that all great things come from youth. But I still have dreams and I still have things I want to do. So I'm going to do them. And if I may, I know I'm maybe a little long here. I'll give you a story of someone I know who's well into his 70s. And he was starting to feel, and he told me, he said, Eric, I think this ageism thing is a real thing. And I, my time is probably, I mean, he was basically saying it's time for me to to shut it down and just get out of the game. And I said, "Do you remember that quote from Satchel Paige?" And he kind of looks at me, and I don't remember that. And I go, "Well, let me tell you. It goes something like this: How old would you be if you didn't know how old you are?"
Yeah. Yes.
And I told him, I said, "You do not act like a 72-year-old. So maybe you're taking on the messaging from other people and other entities and transferring that into your own mindset. If you want to act old, yeah, there's tons of people out there that act old. But to me, if you've got the energy and you got the drive, the purpose, why would you stop?" I mean, I give someone, please give me, a good answer. Why would you stop?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, Carol, I don't know when that started, but I think those contributing factors have driven. There's probably a number of folks who I think probably could be making major contributions, but we're told, you're too old, whatever that may be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we do place some artificial age, not limitations, but those markers in time, like the 65 or the 68, when Social Security can kick in, or that you have to start, pulling IRA money because of tax implications and such. So I think those things we have to work with, against, sort of thing. But, we've always talked about that, whatever your situation, you're going to have to plan to be successful. So if you know those markers in time are there, n- know to work with it. So, I mean, let's talk about that mindset. Okay, we know let's say we're nearing that age, that whatever that age is that you put a marker against.
Mhm.
What should our mindset be? I mean, how do we prepare for that? Even though we're not going to say, okay, time, I'm retiring, but we also know, like, wow, I'm 68 and I need to start doing this. There's some subconscious stuff going on there that may be triggering us that we are now old. How do we change our mindset to that? And maybe a little bit to what you had just alluded there. You're as young as you, or you're old as you think you are, but we do have to prepare for that.
Absolutely. And I know, Brett, when I've made pronouncements in my family and even to our financial planner, that I'm never going to retire. I'll
Mhm.
retire when I take my last breath. I mean, I get the looks, right? There's no doubt about it. But my point is not that I want to do exactly the same thing I'm doing today. It probably will look different, as it
Mhm.
should, just like it
Mhm.
looked different when I was 25. I mean, I don't want to go back to
Mhm.
being the ignorant, know it all 25-year-old who thought he ruled the world and everybody should just listen to me. I'm sorry. I, I don't want to be that guy again. I really don't. I
But
like
what,
this.
but when you're 75, you could pull it off though.
Oh,
They'll
oh,
just say, yeah,
but
he's,
you know,
but
Been
but
there,
but
done
no.
that.
oh my gosh, you're right.
Yes.
But my goodness, I like the wisdom and knowledge that I've gained over these years, right? I don't want to go back to that ignorance because I'm actually aghast at some of the things that I said and did at that age. But here's where I'm going with that. The reality is that yes, you should save your money. Yes, you should invest it. Yes, you should plan for when you're going to have to take a required withdrawal from your IRA, or when you're going to have to do something different with Social Security, whatever the case may be. Go ahead and do it. You're just pivoting, I mean, what you did 20 years ago is different than what you're doing today, which will be different than. So for some people, I think, and Carol, I think you might have asked this earlier about, this fear and its root. There's also this sense of mortality. I
Hmm.
mean, we know the range of time that the average human being in the United States, be it male or female, whatever, is going to have to be here. And I obviously, this is not a show to delve into that subject matter, but I do believe that's part of the root. And the mindset thing, though, is that, again, since our brain has all this plasticity, right? Why don't we start to change the mindset by rewiring, by telling ourselves, you know what? No, I don't want to stop. I may not want to work for JP Morgan Chase for the rest of my days. I might not want to work for Coca Cola for the rest of my days, but I think I have some things I want to contribute to. There's some places I want to volunteer. There's some businesses I want to start because even if those don't work out, Brett, you're alluding to a mindset, meaning how do I see things in my head? How do I view them, right? I think that's huge. The other part is build your resources now. Both you and Carol know about a personal event in my life with my family that it was it was tragic. It was near really, really tragic, I guess if I can say it that way. But I had someone ask me, I don't know how you're doing it. How are you handling this? And I said, I think it's because I started 5 years ago. I started building resources, and that's not a hey, Eric is such a great guy and so smart and wonderful. It's not about that, but it's just the practical thing. Build your resources early, and that doesn't mean that if you're 58 and listening to this podcast that it's too late. That's not what I mean. I'm just saying, wherever you may be on this time continuum, start building your resources. And I believe, Brett, mindset's included in the building of the resources. We far underestimate the power of that. And a wise mentor told me once, the reason why you build your resources while you can is because when the crisis comes, you'll only be able to draw on the resources that you've built up until that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So, and I think really building those resources includes the notion of when you're saying rewiring your brain, part of that for me was to redefine what retirement meant for me.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things that I have said to clients and individuals who have talked to me about my retirement, was because I basically said I hadn't planned to retire. I left a position with the intention of doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been building resources for years, not necessarily for that, but just for my own needs and my agency at the time. But also, COVID hit. And so I had to pivot. So I had the resources to be able to pivot. And luckily, could go in completely different directions. And I was just fine. But a lot of folks, really, as you said, you may not want to work for Chase or AT&T or whomever forever, but that is the only resource they had. That was, only that's their world was really, really small. And the
Oh,
notion of building resources outside of that world is huge. So
yeah.
let's think in terms of what are the kinds of important things we need to ask ourselves when we're hitting these milestones? Not just what is retirement to me, but what are my next journey? What's my next journey going to be? What are the next steps I can and cannot take? What kinds of changes do I want to make? And really, what do I want to do and what do I not want to do? Which a lot of folks can tell you what they don't want to do. They can't tell you what they want to do.
Yes. And Carol, I'm going to start by going back to your last comments there and then go into that. This idea of building resources, and I think you guys, as well as your audience, know we're not just talking about the financial resources.
Mm-mm.
There's this physical health resources.
Right.
I've seen so many people in family and outside of family that will literally burn themselves to the very nth for a career over 20, 30 years and leave everything else in the dust.
Mm-hmm.
Only to find that, wow, yeah, I did. I invested and I have a lot of money, but that money now is going to pay for what I let go, what I didn't build resources in, as in health. And I don't have to tell anyone the cost of healthcare is unbelievably high. The cost
Mm-hmm.
of assisted living and nursing home care, astronomical. And I get it. Some of us, we're going to draw the unlucky number and it's just going to happen to us. That's just the way life goes. But there are also a number of us that no, you're not in that harm's way. But I can almost guarantee if you ignore your health for 20, 30 years and don't build any resources around that, it's going to cost you. And I'd hate to see that. I mean, but again, when the culture, be it through marketing or otherwise, is telling you everything begins and ends with your career, it's
Mhm.
it's dangerous.
I,
So
I let me just also add
yeah.
too that for the audience, resou- when we're saying resources for healthcare, we're not just talking about who's your doctor, what hospital do you want to go to. It's really bigger than that because, particularly for older adults, there are a lot of resources out there to help you
Mhm.
live a fruitful life, live a safe in a safe environment at home or another location.
Yep.
But people don't ask the questions. I mean, it's not just that they haven't put the resources together ahead of time, but they're not asking the questions of what's out there to help them. And
Yeah,
so
and
again,
Carol,
they're on that path and they can't get off of it.
yeah, and your point leading into the to your last question, when we think about what we want to do, how we want to do it, asking those questions. Again, I'll go back to the work we do at Spirit of EQ. That familiarity with our emotions as well as our thoughts,
Mhm,
getting them both to work together for the optimal decision. Because if you lean on one and not the other, right? If you find
mhm,
yourself, I'm going to go all analytical. I'm going to focus on logic, and you don't factor in emotion. I mean, you're at a disadvantage, just as it is for the other side. If you're purely emotional, right, and you're not giving a lot of attention to the analytical, dangerous, right? Because I think when we get those two to work together, we position ourselves to be able to ask the right questions and logically, maybe, if you want to call it that, we come to that optimal decision. That's a key starting point, I believe, right?
mhm,
And I think it also has to do with purpose. And you kind of alluded to it there at the end of your question, this idea about what do I want?
mhm.
What exactly do I want this to look like? And this is the tough one because again, you're not in a society, there's not a lot of messaging around, hey, have you defined what your purpose in life is? I don't
Mhm.
recall seeing, I don't know if I've ever seen a commercial that really even, I don't know how many social media has those who are wanting to be influencers who will talk that way, but in the end, I mean, is there really a strong force in our society that says, hey, it's great that you've got that advanced degree, but have you determined your purpose?
Mhm.
Typically not. I don't think Jamie Dimon at Chase, and he's just in my head. So for those of you who work for Chase, love Chase, and all that, this is not my. I'm not throwing any. I'm not throwing any stones. Um, but his company's probably not putting a lot of emphasis on that.
Oh,
And I'm not trying to judge again to say that they should or shouldn't or how much percentage wise. I'm just saying overall the messaging does not go there. Right. But
okay.
isn't it interesting that once you retire, as we call it, right, and you leave that organization, regardless of the name on the sign, right, or on the building, you're faced with that. Well, what am I going to do now? What do I want to do? Well, you haven't thought about it because remember those 30 years they were spent all about the organization, all about the next career move, the promotion, the stock options, the 401k. And notice I'm not saying that all those things are bad. I'm saying, but if you do those exclusively and don't include some kind of, okay, well, what is my purpose? What does get me up and make me
Mhm,
excited? What makes me come alive? Well, then I'd say, man, that day that you're now no longer a part of XYZ organization is is going to be a bit challenging.
mhm,
Now, my optimism kicks in. I go, You've never thought about it? Okay, today's your day. You can start thinking about it at 62, 68, 70, 70. I don't care what age. As long as the brain is working and you've got the ability to put it together, you can begin to search and find your purpose. Now, I get it. There's life is a limited time offer. And you may not have as many years as if you had started when you were 35. But oh my, go ahead and start today.
Mm. Yeah. I looking at as we move forward, and sometimes they call this retirement era, or when we start to slow things down a little bit, but redo things, our third chapter of life, basically. And now I get the golden opportunity of being a part of when you record your Spirit of EQ podcast. So this is going to be a shameless plug for the Spirit of EQ. And
Thank you in advance.
and actually talking about an episode that I think may be out by the time this episode's out, but I'm going to reference it. It's episode 142. And while you were talking about this, it reminded me of what we're going to call that episode Mystery of Neural Pathways, and that self-evaluation mode. That what a great opportunity to prepare ourselves emotionally by really taking a look at who you are at that point in time. And it kind of goes back to a little bit. And I want to ask, how do we prepare ourselves emotionally? How do we take a look at that? Okay, who am I? Who am I right now? And how do I move forward? Because I let that job define me for 30 years. Now what do I do? And I guess I ask you, how can you go through a process of some self-evaluation at that point in time?
Yeah. So once again, thank you for the plug for
Yeah,
our
sure.
episode. I think I'm going to take it back to the building of resources, right? And thinking in terms of, okay, what's the best way for me to know what I want to do? I believe it's growing your self-knowledge. It's getting to know Eric better, getting to know Brett better, getting to know Carol better. What is it that makes you afraid, Brett, Carol, Eric? What is it that gets you excited? What is it that gets you to pause? What breaks your heart? And just begin the exploration. And I totally get it. All of us have trauma in our backgrounds. All of us have had experiences. There are things that we'd prefer not to talk about. There's that experience from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it may be. But you don't have to tackle it all at once. That's not what I'm advocating. Maybe you need to go to a therapist to help you to be able to come to terms with that trauma situation. Maybe it's a pastor or a priest or whatever it may be that can kind of help you navigate. But I can tell you, the better that you know you, the decision making thing goes up exponentially, right? Because this process is one of, okay, and I've used this analogy, and Brett, you've probably heard it before. It's like game film. Why does a professional athlete or even an amateur athlete watch game film? Well, they want to see what the opponent is doing. They want to understand why they stand the way they do, why they run at a certain stride, but they also want to know about their own tendencies. Why is it that I always go to the left? Why is it that when we play this particular team, I get really, really nervous and I'm not the same player? We should be doing that on ourselves. Now, if key thing here, you got to be curious and not judgmental. Stealing from Uncle Walt, right? But the reality of that is, if we can be just curious, like I'm going to look at my game film. I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to do that. I should have. I wish I would have. I could have. I'm not. If you can stay away from that and just go, I'm going to watch. I'm going to watch my own game film. How do I behave? What do I do? That's getting to know yourself. That's getting to know what makes you tick, why you operate the way you do. And the better that knowledge is, confidence grows, courage grows. And then all of a sudden, Brett, when you come to me at 65 and say, hey, Eric, I got this great business idea. It's in cryptocurrency. We're going to make millions. And you know me, I don't say these things lightly. Let's do it. If I know myself, I can check in. Wait a minute. I'm not really that interested in making more money. That doesn't, no, with the time I have left. But here's the opposite end of that. If I don't know myself, if I haven't explored my emotions, I don't know how my brain works, maybe I'll be feel the pressure of Brett's enthusiasm and his it's a sure thing. And maybe I'll decide, well, okay, sure. And you'd say, but man, it's crypto and it's not it's very risky and on but Brett, I don't know myself. So what do I got to reference? What resources can I draw on? I haven't built any. And again, I want to stress to your audience, you can start today.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm stealing from Bill Ackman. I've got all these quotes in my head from all these people. Hedge fund manager Bill Ackman said, "Progress is like money; it compounds over time."
Right. I was thinking the same thing. It being prepared on your financials, the one thing we always tell our young relatives, put $10 in the bank today because it's going to be worth this much in 30 years. That compound interest. Get one resource today and it's going to compound. It's going to provide other resources for you.
Read one book, listen to another podcast.
Right.
Take someone to coffee to pick their brain. Just a little bit more, and it compounds. And again, our brains have so much of this plasticity that we can change the way that we think about these things. And I think that's the big key. I mean, you guys have uttered the word mindset. It's essential because without that, you're going to be at the mercy of the tide of marketing and the tide of cultural influence. You know, what my dad did, what my mom said I should do, right? All those things, those forces are really powerful and they will carry you. But I think as we build the resources and which leads to that mindset, a healthy mindset, a robust mindset, we position ourselves to be making these optimal decisions into retirement, as we call it, more so than we are without it.
Mm-hmm. When I was starting to contemplate leaving my nonprofit and thinking about, what did I like doing? What did I didn't like doing? The biggest joke was somebody said, Carol, you're really good at writing grants. You could make a ton of money writing grants. And I'm like, I hate writing grants. I wouldn't write a grant again for love nor money. And if I wanted to write grants, I'd stay with my agency because that's all I was doing was writing grant reports. But what I really did was give myself the opportunity of time. And that was how I was able to sit back and think, here's everything I've done, not just in this job, but other jobs. Of all of those things, what did I enjoy doing? What did I enjoy a lot, enjoy kind of, not enjoy at all? And then what were the skills that I needed in the things that I enjoyed? And that really put me on a path of what I wanted to do next. Now, as I said, COVID kind of got in the way. And then Brett kept emailing me saying, we have to do more podcasting. So that sort of swayed me a little bit. But when somebody is willing to give themselves the time, willing to start asking those questions, both analytically and emotionally, and they're starting to put that together, what are the next steps?
Oh,
I mean,
Carol.
you could sit there with like your thoughts going crazy. How do you like hone in?
Well, it's interesting. And again, this might end up on your editing room floor. We did a
No.
podcast with a lady, I believe she's in Denmark, Lyndall Farley, and she's a sabbatical coach. And
Oh,
her whole
fun.
mission is all around taking sabbaticals, how it works, how it can be a benefit. I mean, it's a great episode, but she speaks to a lot of what you just said is the giving of yourself of giving time to do that self-reflection, to build that self-knowledge, right? And I think that's essential. And obviously when people typically when they hear sabbatical, they think of this long extended My employer will never go for that, or, I don't think I could pull that off or whatever. And some of that, if you're doing the official sabbatical as it is defined, yes, it does maybe look that way, but she made it clear it does not have to be the 6 months away from your workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say if the economics don't make sense, if the employer situation is not optimal for it, you can plan micro sabbaticals. Maybe the next 5 weekends, you're going to go to Hocking Hills and you're just going to spend your weekend there. And you're going to spend that time thinking about, reflecting on, and building a plan and asking yourself those powerful questions so that you can craft and have a good sense about what you want to do next. I think that giving yourself that margin is huge. I would also say, and I've been really focusing a lot on this in my own life, is this idea again about core beliefs. Because what typically happens with us, once again, is these core beliefs get developed in childhood and they birth neural pathways. And we go out into the world with them and we operate as if what I created to survive my family environment, my church environment, whatever, is still applicable, right? And for some, this is a deep work and it may require the help of a professional. And I suggest that wholeheartedly. Or you could do what I did. I wrote down a list. What are my core beliefs? And I questioned him. Is this true? Is this belief really true? Is it applicable? Is it still useful? Then, okay, what do I do with it? Do I agree with it? Do I think that I'm not good enough because when I was 8 years old, I was told you're never going to amount to anything. You're not smart. Is that really true? I even went the path, guys, of writing down the contrary to that negative type of core belief. So take the example, someone who says, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Well, hold on. I want you to write a list of all the times you were good enough. I mean, every time you got the job, every time someone asked for your help. And I said, I bet you anything, you'll get a list that's quite long. Oh, wow. So you mean I don't have to think like this anymore? No, you don't. Again, it's not an overnight magic cure type thing, but it's back to that rewiring of your brain. It's back to building a different way of thinking, a different mindset.
Yeah. Just for reference, that sabbatical episode is episode number 137. I had to look it up really quickly. So just so you know, I mean, let's just do the right thing and let the listener know how to go back to
very good, Brett. Very good. Thank you.
Brett, we'll make sure that all of those links are in our resources for this podcast so that we make sure that folks can go back and listen to Spirit of EQ podcast too. I want to just add on to what you just said, because although our emphasis in this podcast is on retirement, what you just explained is something we could do at any time in our life. We don't have to wait till we're 55, 60, 65. This is something that a 25-year-old can do, because chances are pretty good they've been told along the line, well, you're not really that smart. You're not going to Harvard. Your degree from this little college is going to get you this far. And, but you'll be okay. Just stick with your job. You'll be okay. Any age.
Carol, and that is where the power of curiosity comes in. Right. Because I think what happens is we take well-meaning advice and or matter of fact, you can even take stupid advice. Okay. Right.
Well-meaning, but stupid.
Okay. Well-meaning. I mean, it could be absolutely the worst. Right. And if we can be curious and go, okay, I'm not going to judge the person that said that to me. I'm not going to make them a villain. Is it true? Is it true I can only get this far because I didn't go to Harvard? Does that mean I'm not smart? Because I think what happens is we want to attach a villain to everything, right? There needs to be a
That's a
hero
good
and a
point.
villain.
Yeah.
You know,
Right. Right.
somebody's right and somebody's wrong. I'm coming at it from a much more non-dualistic perspective. It's like, okay, well, maybe your dad was having a really bad day and he was frustrated in the moment you asked him, and he blew up and he said it, but it was because he had a bad day. And maybe your dad wasn't the type that he could like come back later and go, I probably shouldn't have said that. I'm very sorry. I apologize. Maybe like you and like me and like the rest of the human population, we make mistakes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that should free us up, right? To kind of go, well, let me just examine this thing that I've been believing, this idea. And if it's not useful to you, why don't you just let it go and
Put it aside.
put it
I
aside? And I have to say it this way too, and maybe to the exhaustion here. I understand these things can hurt. They can be
Yeah.
really, really deep and powerful that way. I'm not saying you just wake up tomorrow and you do it and it's fine. Maybe for some it is that. But for some, you might need some help. You might need someone to come alongside of you and help you process it and help you kind of, okay, I got to build the courage. I can't take all 5 steps. I can only have the strength to take 2. Cool. Let's just take 2 today. So I really want to stress that too, because it's some of this stuff can be really daunting. So daunting that some people they'll go the other way.
And that really goes back to that notion of building your resources. I love that note when you're saying it's the power of curiosity. Oftentimes, folks would say to me, "You're really a good networker," and I said, "Well, the problem is that I am just nosy. I love hearing what other people do. Not that it's making any impact on me personally, but just having that vision, their little sparks that are out there that could help me give a spark to a client. So that notion of learning and learning and learning, it can build your own. It can build for your own resource base too.
Yeah.
Sometimes my friends they don't want to ask me for referrals and resources because then I inundate them with information and they're overwhelmed. I just did that to a friend and I'm like, oh, probably shouldn't have done that. But
Yeah. Yeah. Up to this point, we've really kind of talked about getting up to that point of where you're looking at that third chapter, or semi-retirement, or you're doing something a little bit different. Let's take a look at now you're there. You're at 70 and 75. And we talked about this. It's never too late to begin again, I guess you could say. But we also know Father Time is staring us down, that we know, okay, I'm not 25 anymore. I'm 75. So how can we emotionally take a look at we're 65, 70, 75 and reevaluate, am I still happy? But uh, I'm stuck at 75. How can I change things? I'm 75. I may only live for who knows how long I'm going to live. I don't have that time on my side, but we shouldn't we take a look at that? So you're 75, big deal. Change. If you're not happy, why wouldn't you at that time? I mean, how should we address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's really the example of 2 types of people, right? The first type of person has probably built the resources over time, right? And they know how to navigate. They've done some exploration of themselves. They may have developed their emotional intelligence, and it life looks different at 75 to them, but they know how to navigate. They're in tune, right?
Yeah.
And I think for those people, it's not easy, but the navigation of that time is probably very efficient and productive. They're more than likely to come out, on the other side of it with, okay, this is my next move. This is what I'm going to do next, and such. If the person has started late, it's going to be more challenging because the reality of father time, as you alluded to earlier, Brett, is that it is that thing. You've taken a lot of hits. you've lost, you've seen a lot, and it's just your energy levels, all of that are different and less probably, right? I mean, they're not as robust. So it's going to be harder, I think, for that person. It's not impossible, right? My mom is 91 years old, and I don't know if it was a month or so ago. I made a suggestion to her. I said, "Hey, mom, when you get up from your chair, don't just immediately get up and start going directly to the kitchen. Just pause for a little bit and do some marches." And she looked at me like, "Well, wait a minute. I mean, marches, Eric. I mean, come on, I'm 91." I said, "No, mom, I'm not talking about you're like in a marching band. It's nothing like that. But it's just small little marches, because what that'll do is it'll help the blood flow from your legs to move more efficiently upward so that you don't have the potential. It reduces the chances of a fall." She's doing it. Okay. Um, Someone might say, she's 91. She's not going to. Well, see, there, I think we go back into that cultural mindset thing again. 91, she'll be lucky if. That's man made. That's not necessarily true,
Right.
right? So for that person, they can begin to start to explore, well, what are these things in my life that I like? What don't I like? And what's my typical way of approaching this relationship? Oh, you know what? I'm gonna go and I'll buy that book on EQ. I know I'm not using it in the corporate world, but I can learn.
Mhm.
And once again, even at 75, your brain still has a good bit of that plasticity. You can begin to think differently. Again, it's a lot harder for the person that has not done it before than that other person, right? That we gave the example of, who built resources maybe 20, 30 years prior. But I'm an optimist. So I believe it's there at our disposal as long as we have all of the faculties and being able to put it together. That to me is the key.
Eric, there was when I was in one of my previous roles at Ohio State in continuing education, and we worked with adult students who often said to us, I'm 30 years old. If I go back to school now, I could be 40 before I actually get my degree. And one of our administrators very succinctly would look at the student and say, "Well, you're going to be 40 one way or the other. Do you want it with your degree or without your degree?" And boy, did that turn a lot of heads. And that I think that I've been thinking about that all through our talk today. It kind of encapsulates that notion of try to give yourself some time, being prepared, get your resources, think about this journey, and yes, you can do it. That kind of puts it all together. So, for what it's worth, I thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah.
Um, be, Before we leave you today, and thank you so much, this is amazing. We always ask our guests for their last words of wisdom. So, if you have suggestions, resources, reading materials, whatever could assist our listeners, plus for our listeners, we will have contact information on Spirit of EQ. If this is something you want to ask Eric questions, I'm taking the assumption that he's shaking his head yes, that he will
Yes.
answer questions, from our
Yes, I will.
audience. So thank you again. But give us your last words of wisdom.
Sure. Well, I'm going to start with kind of a recapitalizing, if I can say it that way, of what we've kind of been talking about, and it's that idea about building your resources, and that to me is key, right? Because and maybe I'll call them the four pillars. Your mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical health, and make that a priority. And in many respects, it's a way of analyzing, okay, well, what level of resources do I have in each of these four pillars? How strong are they? Because when those are strong, it's not designed so that it will prevent you from the crisis, or it will keep you from a crisis, or a challenging time. It's just so that you have them there to help you to navigate when that occurs, right? And to me, it's even as simple as I'm going to just write down those 4 areas, and I'm going to evaluate how am I doing in that? How am I doing with my diet? How am I doing with exercise? How am I doing with, managing my mental health? How's my outlook? When was the last time I did go see a therapist? Are there areas of trauma in my life that I really haven't addressed that I probably should, and I need help to do that? Once again, if you can do it with curiosity, you'll open up the doors. You'll begin to go, okay, I want this to get better. And I wonder if maybe reading that book, reading that, or going to see that counselor, therapist, whatever, that could be helpful. I'm going to explore that because I'm curious. And I get it. Someone might say, well, they don't accept insurance, so it's going to be really, really expensive. Well, wait until you hear that. And then maybe even when you find out it's expensive, like, well, how much are you paying for these streaming services that you have? Maybe you give those up for 6 months so you can afford to have 3 sessions with a counselor, whatever, right? But it's, again, you're trying to build the resources, just continually building the resources. So a few other things I would throw out to you from a podcast perspective that I really, really have gotten a lot out of. The first one, I'm going to be selfish. Spirit of EQ podcast. Lots of episodes, a lot of self-knowledge, exploration. You'll get a lot out of it. And what I really appreciate is that we're not trying to sell you on our next book, our next event, and trying to get you to sign up for the email list. We really do put that podcast out because we want people to be able to grow their EQ. Now, in addition, there is one called Typology. This one is with Ian Morgan Cron. He is kind of the big Enneagram expert. And he typically has some really, really good guests that talk about things around personality, that again, the self-knowledge and that type of thing. Another one I really like is the Huberman Lab podcast. This comes with a warning. His podcasts are very long. Some people maybe have the time and the bandwidth to listen to 3 hours of podcast, but I can tell you, and he's very good about this, you can find, like in most shows, I think these days, timestamps. Hey, in timestamp hour 2 and 30 seconds, they're talking about this thing. Well, then you can go there, click on it, boom. You start listening to it. So that makes his a bit more digestible, if I can say it that way. And then I've got one other one that I particularly like too, and this one is maybe a little more edgy in nature. But the guy can have some really good insights. His name is Scott Galloway, and I believe it's called the Prof G Podcast. I think he's a professor at NYU. I think that's where that comes from. That's another one that's really good. Again, he can be controversial. Nothing. I mean, he's not off color. Nothing that's going to overtly offend you, but he's got some insights. And if you're curious, I'll go back to that. You can find some wisdom with what he talks about. Catalyst for that one is he had an episode about this book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. I may have the title so wrong, Carol and Brett, but it's a book really about EQ without it really actually mentioning EQ. And if you think about it, it's really kind of this idea about, okay, thinking fast applies to when I'm at the stoplight and the light goes from red to green. You think fast. You're not contemplating what do I do when the light is green now versus red. You go. But if your child comes to you, be they adult or otherwise, and says, I don't think I can do this anymore, you're not going to apply fast thinking. You're going to slow that down. Whoa, are you okay? What's going on? Tell me more about that. That's slow. And you can imagine what happens if you apply fast thinking to that kind of scenario, right? So that's a book that I think is of real good value. and most recent on my list. It was written some time ago, but and then lastly, I know I'm kind of giving you a laundry list here. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's a neuroscience professor, I believe, at Northeastern University. I'm not sure if it's exactly her. If it's is she considered to be a neuroscience professor? It might be in psychology, but she's brilliant. Your listeners could go and Google her name, and you'd find multiple books, sites, information. She's someone whom has influenced me greatly in understanding how the brain works and the connection to emotions. So that's a few.
Wonderful.
Great. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Well, many thanks to our expert guest, Eric Pennington, managing partner of Spirit of EQ, for joining us today. Listener, thank you for joining us. You're going to find contact information and the resources we discussed in the podcast show notes and on our website at lookingforwardourway.com. And we are looking forward to hearing your feedback on this or any of our other podcast episodes.
The views and opinions expressed by the experts interviewed on this podcast are their own and don't necessarily reflect the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. The information provided in these interviews is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals for specific advice or information related to their individual circumstances. The podcast host and producers don't endorse or guarantee the accuracy, completeness, or reliability of any information provided by the experts interviewed. Listener discretion is advised.